Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.
Hi, I'm Gordon Raquel from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course, follow me on Twitter at filmmaker_U. Every week we interview film professionals to talk about their work, and this week I'm joined by hair and makeup artist Lynda Armstrong, whose work includes Tim Burton's Batman, Stranger Things, and The Princess, just to name a few. Welcome to the show, Lynda.
Hello.
I guess I have to ask about Tim Burton's Batman because I was just a kid when it came out, and I just remember it was like nothing else had like ever existed before. It was very different for me. So what was it like getting on that project, and how did you come to understand Tim Burton's sort of vision for Batman?
Well, I mean, when it first came out, I was quite new to. Well, I wasn't that new, but I was much younger. It was a long time ago. So, I was working with a makeup man actually at the time, and to work on it was amazing actually. I sort of to work with Jack Nicholson, to work with Tim Burton, and to work with Jerry Hall, who's a model. So there was all, and Kim Basinger was on it, and it was very different because Tim, I think he's very visual, and he's very he draws incredible cartoons himself, and I mean he's incredibly artistic. So that was a new experience for us. And it was lovely to sort of be able to design or be able to make up different areas of the film. I suppose you had the clowns, you had Jack was there, you had Jerry with the burnt face, and it was pretty cool, to be honest. It was at the beginning of my career, so it was it was cool.
Now, I always heard that Michael Keaton's costume, he couldn't turn his neck. And were there any issues for makeup in terms of his costume that you had to keep in mind?
No, the only thing was what we had to do was, because his eyes, the costume, it was all a rubber suit, or even over his face, really, down to here. We had to like blacken around his eyes so that you didn't, see big panda eyes, I suppose.
Yeah, reverse panda eyes, I guess.
Yeah.
Now, your recent work on The Princess was set in medieval times, or set a long time ago. So how do you, because there wasn't photography or film back then, so how do you sort of get an understanding of makeup for back then, or hairstyles for back then?
Okay, so my research was paintings from the time. A lot of them are religious paintings, but they're still there. And archives of sort of statues. And there is a little bit of it, because that film was different periods of medieval. Medieval goes over 4 centuries. It's quite a long period. Because it was sort of fantasy, we weren't locked into a period, but I tried to, with the royal family and with her, to start her off as early-ish medieval. And that's how I did my search, and going into museums, and then learning that there's certain things that braids were very big into hair, and makeup. They did pluck all their hair out and pluck eyebrows out. They did a lot of stuff, and berries maybe for their lips, and so you can read up a little bit about that from seeing what pots they even had and why they had the pots. And then later on, that, you know, when you go into the later medieval, there is quite a lot of references, actually, you know, Tudor, early Tudor, and all that. So there's a lot of references to all this through painting, really. Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot. Yeah. So that's how I did it, really.
So you talked about things like the berries for the lips. How do you, because I feel like that would have a very specific look as opposed to like lipstick nowadays. So it's like,
like a stain. It would be like a stain.
So how did you do that for the actors?
You can buy lip stains now.
Oh, okay.
Or you can make them up, you know, with a bit of, you know, vegetable color or a bit of stain with a bit of matte. You know, you'd want to keep their lips matte instead of shiny, because that wouldn't be quite right. So you can use, you know, matte lip balm and just make them up to certain colors. And you know, with their hair, they braided their hair and they used false pieces actually as well in their hair. So that was interesting, actually, because especially for her, she had to, you know, she fights all the way down. I mean, she's fighting all the time. So I had to be very very careful that what I did was not going to obstruct her fighting, but also I could dishevel it coming down. So I could lose bits and lose pearls and, you know, things like that. So
interesting. How did you work with like the costume designer, the director, and other department heads to sort of create this world? Like, do you play off the costume department in terms of the makeup?
I mean, on the Princess, I worked a lot with Verity, because obviously, because you know, they run through the centuries, I needed to know where she was going, you know, because it's got to look like one, you know, the hair and makeup's got to look like the same with the costume. And then I had to, as she comes down the tower as well, I mean, for her, she loses bits of her costume. So I had to know which bit she was going to lose. You know, she would be bruised underneath, and she would, you know, then have scratches later on. And so I had to work that all out with the costume designer. And color wise, it's just, you know, Joey had red hair in it. And which is, again, if you see a lot of religious paintings, a lot of their hair was red, but it just happened to, it really suited Joey, and it really looked great with the costumes as well. So, you know, with the color she was wearing, and also with the other characters, you know, the two characters that were the baddies, they were all in blacks. So I did dark hair, and their hairdos were not, because it was fantasy, were not, they had a feeling of it, but they weren't medieval. They were out of it a bit. And then you have the sort of the Asian area, and I went to look at, because they were wearing lovely blues and really lovely colors, I did things in their hair that would match that. And yeah, so we worked very closely, actually, and with Crown and everyone.
Well, and you talked about briefly the Asian section. So there are different cultures in this film. So how did you how did you approach the makeup differently for the different cultures, and like make sure that it sort of matched what needed to be done?
I think with Christopher and I looked a lot at old photos of samurai warriors, and so he has, you know, a slight knot in his hair there, and then when he's going to the wedding, it's a bigger one. It's got the colors, so that's how I went with him. And then with Veronica, we decided to do a lot of braids, which was very medieval anyway, but we put coloured ribbon into it, or coloured leather into it, so that we could, it looks a bit more Eastern, and some feathers and things,
Yeah. So, and you talked about earlier, you just mentioned that it happens over several sort of decades or time.
Medieval,
Yeah. So for the characters, how did the makeup adjust or change with their character arcs or anything like that, or how did that
yes
work?
I mean, if their costumes, you know, like there's if their costumes were slightly more Tudor like, then their hair would be more Tudor like, and their makeup really, but because it was fantasy as well, it gave me another little leeway as well to go a little bit further on certain characters. I mean, then we had all the mercs that, you know, and each one of them were designed individually, and you know, one of them has a big helmet on with horns on it, big horns, and it gets swiveled around. And he was wearing a wig, and he had some dreads in his beard, but for that helmet to be swiveled around, you have to make sure the wig's put on very well and it's not going to get ripped. And so, you know, the wardrobe would maybe put some padding in it so that it would slide around a little bit easier. Things like that. There's lots of stuff. And also, I suppose, you know, with the two, Dominic and Olga, you know, they were wearing dark things, and they were dark characters. They're not slightly in the realm of medieval, but they're I kept them dark. Yeah.
Now you meant
sets too, you know, you sort of look at the sets as well, you know.
Well, how do the sets impact the makeup and hair?
Well, with color, you know.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The wardrobe would be with the, you know, that as well. And you know, sometimes it's like, you know, maybe they've taken something from the set and whacked somebody over the head. So I need to know what that is from the props so that I can know what the wound looks like.
Yeah. Well, and you've done prosthetic work as well. So, you know, what, I guess, where does, this is a weird question. I don't even know if I'm asking it properly, but like, where does the makeup end and the prosthetic begin, or how does that, so those two roles sort of merge?
Whoa, it's a difficult question, actually. Well, okay, some things you can do with highlight and shading and drawing, and other things you can't. They need to be deeper. Maybe the cuts need to be deeper. Maybe somebody needs a false nose, and you can't. You've got to put a piece there, and then over the top you make up. So they gel quite well together.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I suppose when you're designing it, you're trying to figure out, I'm not talking about the princess particularly in this, but you need to work out what that character, if you need something to enhance it, you know, maybe they're meant to look like an animal. So what would I do to their face to make them that human, still look like a human, but looks slightly like a certain animal? Or aging is another one, you know.
Interesting. Now, you've done prosthetics. Is there a particular prosthetic in your career that you've done that you were like, that was the most fun or most exciting to tackle?
I did an old age makeup many years ago on something called Feast of the Goat, which was about a dictator in the Dominican Republic in the 50s, and I did an old age makeup on that, and it was really fun to see what you could do with a prosthetic, and then color it, and then instead of having the whole face as a prosthetic, to be able to color and draw so that it mingles into one, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, it was a good thing to do.
How long did that take usually? Because I always hear horror stories from actors being like, I was in the chair for 8 hours. Or, you know.
Oh, that took about 3 hours.
Wow.
3 hours, yeah.
So do you have any techniques or tricks to keep actors calm so they don't go crazy for so long in the chair?
Well, you let them have a little break. And you know, they can listen to music, or we could put TV up for them to look at, or, you know, if it's a very long time, you know, it's you know, on Frankenstein, the De Niro's makeup took like something like 6 hours.
Jeez.
And they what they do is they would have him in and do that, and then they'd shoot, and then they'd have the next day off, because you just couldn't do it, because you have to take it off as well. It's not just, you know, at the end of the day, that takes a while too.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Now, what would you say was your most challenging makeup job?
Most challenging. Wow.
And why?
Why would it be most challenging? Well, there's a few different actually things that I've done. That one was a film that was so it was a film that was meant to be a world of origami. And so also the fighting was meant to be like a dance. And it was all set in different places in a country. It's all fantasy thing, but it was all like, there was a Chinatown, there was a Western town, there was the loggers, there was a punk area, there was, you know, and that was challenging because each area as well had different lighting effects. So one was red, one was yellow, one was green, and it was really interesting actually. And it was really nice to design because it was different areas. So that was a big challenge. What else would be a challenge? Well, the aging was a challenge, because those sort of things always are, you know. There's so many different. I mean, every film has a challenge, to be honest.
Yeah.
Every film has a challenge.
How did it change? But like, how did your job change as we shifted to digital? Because when I talked to cinematographers, lighting all changed. So like, how did your role change?
A lot. It changed.
Oh, really? Like, what changed?
Well, you know, when it was 16 and 35 mil, and it was, you couldn't keep shooting because it was going to cost too much. So that was another thing. So you couldn't make mistakes as easy. You know, I'm not talking particularly about my department, I'm talking about everyone.
Yeah.
And you digitally, you know, I think it's getting much better, but at the beginning you could sort of see, it was so clear. Everything was so clear that you could see everyone's pore on their face. And you know, if you had lace, you had to be like really careful because you could see the lace. It was just so in your face, really, to be honest. But now it's getting a little bit more so that you can make it a little bit more moody and stuff like you could with Super 16. You know, if you were doing a period movie years ago, and you'd see a lighting cameraman walking around with lighting the back from the back of his hand. And, you know, he didn't use monitors. He didn't use any, it was incredible. It was just so beautiful. But it was, you could stand by the camera and sort of half close your eyes slightly and then say, what film are you using? And then you knew more or less what you were going to see. And you could look through the camera. Now it's, because it's digital, everybody looks at monitors. So it is quite different.
Interesting.
And it can be very, like can be really, it can be, your work has to be really, you know, precise actually. I mean, it always did on film, to be fair, and instead of television, but it always, even on film before, but it's, it's quite, lace and edges and prosthetics, and because if you know, they can get rid of them digitally, they can, you know, but that costs a lot of money, so why not try and get it done really well so it doesn't cost the company money? So
interesting. Now I have one last question for you. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or show to watch?
I always loved the original Blade Runner.
Oh yeah, that's great. Now, which cut? Because they have so many cuts of it.
Well, the first one that came out, actually.
Okay.
The first one that came out, I remember watching it and just thinking, oh my God, I just love this film. I think it's very moody and beautiful. And TV, God, there's a lot, isn't there?
Yeah, it's an embarrassment of riches we have these days.
There's an awful lot of TV. I think Nicole Kidman's done quite a few really good TV series that I've liked over the last few years. She's done some really nice stuff actually. So that's probably and I like Stranger Things in a it's, you know, it's something that I never thought I was going to like.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you started watching it and you go, oh, actually, I quite like this. I have to keep watching it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
That's my pleasure.
And that's it for this week. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.
Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.